The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light over the marble towers of Ilandor. The streets below bustled with movement, but not with joy. Humans, dressed in rough gray tunics, moved quickly through the clean stone walkways, heads down, voices silent. High above them, the elves walked like lords, robes flowing, their silver hair catching the light. They did not look at the humans. They never did. Caldero kept his eyes on the ground as he carried a crate of glowing crystal shards across the plaza. His arms ached, but he did not slow. One stumble, one wrong glance, and the elf guards would notice. And when the guards noticed, pain followed. He reached the base of the Spire Forge, a tall structure filled with strange humming magic. Placing the crate on the bench, he wiped sweat from his brow and stepped back. The elf overseer looked over the delivery, nodded without a word, and turned away. Kale said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was safer than speech. As he walked back to the workers' quarters, Kale's thoughts drifted. His mind did that often. While his body obeyed, his mind wandered through ruins and stories his grandfather once told. Stories of human cities filled with light and song, of a time before the elves came in shining armor and took it all. They called humans weak, short-lived, unworthy of magic. But Kel remembered the secret symbols carved into the old walls of Meridon. He remembered the echo of voices that seemed to speak when no one was there. He remembered finding the small silver box beneath the rubble, deep in the earth. It hummed when he touched it, like it knew him. That was 3 days ago. Now hidden beneath the floor of his sleeping room, the silver box pulsed softly with light. No one else knew, not even the other humans who shared the small stone room. Kale waited each night for the others to sleep. Then he listened, and the box whispered. It spoke not in words, but in images and feelings. He saw flashes of ski ships, of great halls filled with fire and banners. He felt warmth, strength, and something else. Knowledge. The box was not just old. It was a piece of something greater, something the elves had buried long ago. Tonight, he would try again. Tonight, he would ask the box for answers. But as he reached the door to the sleeping quarters, a loud horn echoed through the city. Kale froze. Across the street, an elf guard dragged a human boy by the arm, shouting about theft. The boy cried out, but the elf only tightened his grip. No one moved to help, not even Kale. He stepped into the shadows and clenched his fists. One day, he thought, the elves will regret looking down on us. And with that, he walked inside, the sound of the horn still ringing in the air. Night had fallen over the worker quarters. The streets were quiet now, the lamps glowing with soft blue fire. Kel sat on his bed, his back to the wall, waiting for the others to sleep. One by one, he heard the slow, steady breathing of tired men. No one stirred. No one noticed when he slipped quietly to the floor. He pulled back the loose stone tile and reached into the small space beneath it. The silver box was still there, smooth and cold to the touch. It pulsed gently, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Kale looked at it for a long moment, then placed both hands on top. As soon as his skin met the surface, a warm light spread through his arms. His thoughts grew sharper, his breathing slowed. The box opened without a sound, revealing a single round crystal set in a dark metal ring. Strange symbols moved across its surface, shifting like water. Cal did not know the symbols, but somehow he understood them. They were pieces of a language he had never learned, yet they felt familiar. The artifact spoke not with sound, but with feeling and thought. This time it showed him fire, bright and wild, shaped by human hands. He saw a human figure raising the sky itself, calling storms with a single word. Behind the figure stood others, many others, working together, building cities that touched the stars. The vision faded, and Kale was left in the silence of the small room. His hands trembled, but his eyes were full of new fire. The elves had lied. Humans had once held great power. Power that came not from perfect blood, but from the will to learn and survive. For hours, Kale studied the crystal. Each time he touched it, it showed him something new. A symbol, a map, a tool made from both stone and light. He began to draw what he saw, using bits of charcoal on scraps of cloth. It felt like learning how to read again, only faster, deeper. He knew he had to be careful. If the elves found this, they would destroy it. They would call it forbidden, dangerous, illegal. But Kale no longer cared about their rules. He saw the truth now. When the morning bell rang, he quickly hid the crystal and the drawings beneath the floor. His face was tired, but his mind was awake. Something had changed inside him. He no longer felt afraid. He felt ready. As he walked out into the gray streets, the sky above was turning pale. Another day of work waited for him. Another day of silence, of carrying crates, of being ignored. But deep inside, Kale carried something more powerful than any elf could imagine. He had knowledge, and soon he would share it. The day of the festival arrived with the usual fanfare. Elven banners hung from every street corner, bright and colorful. The air smelled of sweet fruit and roasted meats, and music echoed through the city. But Kale didn't hear the music. He didn't see the banners. He didn't smell the food. His mind was focused on something much more important. Tonight was not a celebration. It was the beginning of something. The Emberborn, the secret group of humans Kale had gathered, had spent weeks preparing for this day. They had learned the city's routines, the movements of the guards, the places where the elves' eyes were weakest. Tonight, they would strike. Kale stood with Ressa Varn, his second in command, near the edge of the city. She looked at him with a serious expression, her face hidden beneath the hood of her cloak. Ressa was a skilled fighter, once a gladiator in the city's pits. Now she was the one who taught the Emberborn how to fight back. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Kale nodded, his hand steady but his heart racing. "We strike at the heart of their power." They weren't attacking a palace or a fortress, though. Their target was the Ivy Halls, the great library where the elves kept their knowledge of magic and history. It was a place that had long been off limits to humans. But Kale knew that if they could take it, they could take a step toward equality, toward proving that humans were more than just workers. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would sneak into the library, using the shadows to avoid the guards. They would disable the protective wards that kept humans away from the inner halls. And then, when the time was right, they would steal one of the most important tomes in Elven history. It was a bold move. It was also a desperate one. As the group moved closer to the Ivy Halls, Kale felt the tension in the air. The night was still, but every sound seemed louder than usual, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, the distant hum of elven magic, the whisper of wind through the trees. Kale held his breath as they passed the first guard post, a tall elven soldier standing beneath a flickering lantern. He was distracted, looking toward the festival grounds. With careful steps, they moved past him, shadows blending into shadows. They reached the entrance of the Ivy Halls without being seen. The door was made of dark wood and iron, engraved with elven symbols. Kale reached into his cloak and pulled out a small device, a lockpick of sorts, a tool he had learned to use from his studies. It clicked softly, and the door creaked open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and magic. Tall bookshelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and tomes. It was beautiful in a way that made Kale's heart race, but there was no time to admire it. They had a job to do. As they moved deeper into the halls, one of the Emberborn stepped on a loose floorboard. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty halls. "Quiet," Ressa hissed, looking sharply at the man. Kale's pulse quickened. They had to move fast. Any noise now would alert the entire city. But just as they reached the inner chamber, a loud alarm rang out, shattering the silence. The guards were coming. They had been discovered. "It's too late," Kale whispered, gripping the relic he carried in his pocket. "We fight." The alarm echoed through the halls, sharp and unyielding. Kale's heart pounded in his chest as the sound bounced off the stone walls. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. The Emberborn moved quickly, grabbing what they could, maps, scrolls, and books. But Kale knew they couldn't carry everything. They had to leave before the guards arrived. "Move!" Ressa shouted, her voice low but urgent. "We don't have long." They rushed toward the back exit, the one hidden behind a large tapestry of elven history. Kale's fingers were already on the fabric, pulling it aside. The door was small and narrow, but it would get them out. Just as Kale reached for the door handle, a loud crash echoed from the entrance. Footsteps thundered down the corridor, the sound of elves in full pursuit. "Too late," one of the Emberborn whispered, panic creeping into his voice. Kale's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. He looked around quickly and spotted a narrow stairwell leading down into the darkness. "Down there," he said, pointing. "Hurry." Without waiting for a response, he pushed open the door and led the group down the stairs. The air grew colder as they descended, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The only sound was the echo of their footsteps and the rush of their breathing. They reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves in a long, dark tunnel. The only light came from the small torches set in the stone walls, casting long shadows. Kale could feel the weight of the pursuit bearing down on them, but there was no turning back now. This way, Kale said, leading them down the tunnel. The tunnel twisted and turned, taking them deeper beneath the city. The smell of damp earth filled the air, and the walls were slick with moisture. It was a place few elves would dare enter. And yet, as Kale led the group deeper into the darkness, he felt something stirring within him. He wasn't just running from the elves anymore. He was running toward something he could feel deep inside, calling to him. They reached a small chamber at the end of the tunnel, a hidden place that had once been used for old rituals. It was empty now, save for the pile of broken stones in the corner. Kale motioned for the group to stop. "This is where we make our stand," he said, his voice steady. "We fight here." As the group set up, Kale's mind raced. They had no weapons, no magic, just their wits and their courage, and the elves were coming, faster than they expected. He could hear them now, their voices echoing in the tunnel. The hunt had begun. But Kale was ready. The Emberborn were ready. He could feel the weight of the relic in his pocket again, and for the first time he felt its power. It was more than just a piece of ancient magic. It was the key to everything. Everything humans had lost. Everything they could still reclaim. The elves thought they were invincible, but they had never faced humans fighting for their future. Kale stood tall, his fists clenched. "Let them come," he whispered to himself. "Let them come." The tunnel was quiet now, but the air still felt thick with tension. Kale's thoughts raced as he knelt down next to the pile of old stones. The Emberborn had made a temporary camp in the hidden chamber, but it was only a matter of time before the elves found them. They couldn't stay here long. Kale's fingers brushed the rough surface of the stone wall. Something felt off about it, like there was something hidden beneath. He moved a few more stones and discovered a crack in the wall, so narrow it could barely be seen. "Everyone, stand back," he whispered, his voice steady despite the growing weight of the situation. The Emberborn quickly backed away as Kale reached for the crack, his hands shaking slightly with anticipation. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now something deep inside told him that the truth he had been searching for lay just beyond this wall. With one final push, the stones shifted, and the wall opened up. Beyond it was a small room, much older than anything in the city above. The walls were covered in strange symbols, ones Kale had never seen before. They glowed faintly in the dim light from the torches. Kale stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no ordinary room. This was a place forgotten by the elves, a place where history had been buried and hidden away. His hands trembled as he traced the glowing symbols on the walls. They felt alive, almost as if they were speaking to him. A voice echoed in his mind, not a sound, but a feeling. "You are the key," it whispered. He didn't understand at first. The words were strange, and yet they felt familiar. Kale stepped deeper into the room, and that's when he saw it. An ancient pedestal in the center, covered in dust and cobwebs. Resting on top of the pedestal was a stone tablet, carved with the same symbols he had just seen on the walls. Kale reached out carefully, lifting the tablet from its resting place. As soon as his fingers touched the surface, the room seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and the ground beneath his feet hummed with energy. The stone tablet pulsed in his hands, and Kale could feel something inside him, something ancient, awakening. His mind raced as the tablet seemed to show him images, visions of a time long past. Humans once ruled these lands, their cities filled with magic and power. They had built wonders that even the elves could never imagine. But then the elves came, bringing destruction and secrecy. They had taken the knowledge, hidden it, and rewritten history. They buried us, Kale thought, his heart heavy with the truth. But the relic in his hands was proof. Proof that humans had once been more than the elves had led them to believe. And now the time had come to reclaim that power. "Kale," Ressa whispered, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "We need to move. The elves are close." He snapped out of his trance, clutching the tablet to his chest. The others were already gathering their things, preparing for the next step of their journey. But Kale knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for everything humans had lost. He turned to the Emberborn, his voice firm. "We're not running anymore," he said. "We're going to win this war, for all of us." As they moved back into the tunnel, Kale felt a new determination rise within him. The truth had been uncovered, and it had changed everything. The elves may have thought they had buried the past, but Kale was going to make sure it rose again. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon. painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Kale stood on the edge of the forest, looking out at the distant silhouette of Shadewatch Keep. The keep was massive, built high on a hill with strong stone walls and tall towers. It had once been a symbol of the elves' power, but now it was the target of the Emberborn's rebellion. "This is it," Kale whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Beside him, Ressa looked out at the keep with a determined expression. "We're not turning back now. The elves think their walls are enough to keep us out. They're wrong." The Emberborn had gathered in secret, training and preparing for this day. They had learned from their mistakes, growing stronger with each step. They had the relic now, the stone tablet that Kale had uncovered in the hidden chamber. It was the key to unlocking the ancient magic that once flowed freely through the land. With it, they had a chance, perhaps the only chance, to overthrow the elves and take back what had been stolen from them. Kale turned away from the keep and looked at his people. There were about 20 of them, men and women from all walks of life, each with their own reasons for fighting. Some had lost families to the elves' cruelty. Others had been born into a world where humans were nothing more than servants. But now they were united for a common cause. "We strike at dusk," Kale said, his voice low but firm. "We move quickly, quietly. We take out the guards first, then disable the magical wards around the keep." "And if we fail?" one of the Emberborn asked, his voice nervous. Kale looked him in the eye. "We won't fail. The elves think they are invincible, but they've forgotten something important. Humans don't give up. We never have." The Emberborn nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. There was no turning back now. If they didn't succeed, everything they had worked for would be lost. The elves would crush them, just as they had crushed so many others. But Kale believed they could do it. The tablet had shown him that they had the power to stand against the elves, to break their chains and take control of their own fate. The day passed quickly. As the sun sank lower in the sky, Kale and the Emberborn gathered their weapons, simple but effective, blades, bows, and the tools to dismantle the elven magic that guarded the keep. Kale carried the relic close, its weight both a reminder of the stakes and a source of strength. When night fell, they moved like shadows, slipping through the trees and into the foothills below Shadewatch Keep. The guards at the outer walls had been lulled into a false sense of security. They were unprepared for what was about to come. "Stay close," Kale ordered, his voice barely a whisper. They crept forward, silent and swift, until they reached the first set of guards. Kale signaled to Ressa, who nodded. In a flash, they were upon them. One guard fell, then another. It was quick, efficient, but it didn't take long for the alarm to sound. "They're coming," Ressa shouted, eyes wide with urgency. "Move," Kale commanded. The Emberborn scattered, racing toward the keep's gates, while Kale and Ressa worked together to disable the magical wards. Kale held the tablet tightly, feeling the surge of energy it gave him. The symbols on the tablet began to glow, pulsing with power, as he whispered the ancient words it had shown him. The walls of Shadewatch trembled, and for a moment, Kale thought they might collapse entirely. The elven magic that had kept the keep safe for centuries was beginning to weaken. "It's working," Ressa yelled, a fierce smile crossing her face. But the elves were not going to give up easily. Kale could hear their voices now, shouting orders from inside the keep. The fight had only just begun. The sound of the elves' footsteps echoed through the stone halls of Shadewatch Keep. The alarm had been raised, and within moments, the once silent and secure keep was in chaos. Guards shouted orders, their swords drawn, their eyes searching for the intruders. But Kale and the Emberborn were not easy to find. They had planned for this. The elven magic that had once protected the keep was fading, and with it, the elves' advantage. Now it was a battle of strength and wit, and the Emberborn had both on their side. "Keep moving," Kale said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't let them catch us." The group spread out, weaving through the dark corridors. Kale could feel the tension in the air, each step heavier than the last. The keep's halls were winding and unfamiliar, and every corner could hide an enemy. But Kale knew the Emberborn were faster, more resourceful than the elves had ever given them credit for. They had learned how to fight in the shadows. Kale's eyes were on the prize, the heart of the keep where the elven commanders would be. They were the ones who controlled the magic and held the secrets that the Emberborn needed to win. If they could defeat the commanders, the elves' resistance would crumble. "There's too many of them," Ressa whispered, appearing at Kale's side. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of frustration in her eyes. "We can't keep running." "We don't have to," Kale said, a plan forming in his mind. We fight, but we fight smart. He reached into his cloak and pulled out the stone tablet. It glowed faintly, its power still strong despite the chaos around them. Kale had learned much from it, and he knew now that the tablet could do more than reveal the past. It could influence the present, shape the world around them. Kale, Ressa warned, you don't know how much energy this thing has left. It's dangerous. Kale didn't look at her. He was focused on the symbols that still pulsed across the surface of the tablet. He whispered the words he had learned, the ancient language that had once belonged to humans. As he spoke, the air around them began to hum, and the walls of the keep seemed to tremble. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath their feet, and the elven soldiers near them stumbled, disoriented. A wave of energy rippled through the keep, knocking weapons from the elves' hands and disarming them with a force they could not control. The Emberborn used this moment of confusion to strike. Ressa, moving like a shadow, took down one guard with a quick swipe of her blade. Another Emberborn tackled an elf to the ground, subduing him before he could sound the alarm. Kale's heart raced, but he didn't stop. He knew this was their chance. The elven commanders were not far ahead, and the tablet had given them the upper hand for now. The elves would recover, but for a short time, they were vulnerable. They continued deeper into the keep, their movements quicker now. Kale felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. They were close. Just a few more turns, and they would reach the heart of the keep where the leaders waited. He could already hear their voices, cold and commanding, echoing from the distance. It was a sound he had heard too many times before, the sound of the elves' power. But now it was a sound they would no longer control. Kale knew that this fight was just beginning, but tonight they would not be the ones to back down. Kale's heart pounded as he and the Emberborn reached the center of the keep. The long hall stretched ahead, its stone walls lined with ancient tapestries. At the far end, the elven commanders stood, their faces cold and proud, watching the approaching rebels. The room was vast and intimidating, but Kale felt something different now, determined. "This is it," Kale whispered, his voice low but full of conviction. The commanders stood at a raised platform, looking down at them like they were nothing more than insects. There were 4 of them, each one an elf of great power and status, the very leaders who had controlled the city for so long. But Kale knew that they were no longer untouchable. They had underestimated humanity for too long. "You've come far, human," one of the commanders, an elf with long silver hair, said in a voice that was smooth like silk but laced with venom. "But this is where your rebellion ends." Kale stood taller, his grip tightening on the stone tablet. It pulsed with power, the magic flowing through him, filling him with strength. "No," he said firmly. "This is where it ends for you." With a signal from Kale, the Emberborn surged forward, charging toward the commanders. The elves raised their hands, ready to unleash their magic, but it was too late. Kale had learned how to break their spells, how to use their own magic against them. He raised the tablet high and spoke the ancient words that only he could understand. The room shook as a burst of energy exploded from the tablet, sending a wave of power rushing toward the elves. Their magic cracked and splintered, unable to hold against the force of the relic. For the first time in centuries, the elves were caught off guard. The first commander stepped forward, fury in his eyes. He drew his sword, a weapon that gleamed with dark magic, and charged at Kale. But Ressa was faster. She leaped into the air, striking the elf with a swift blow, knocking his sword from his hand. The two fought fiercely, their movements a blur of skill and speed. The second commander, a tall elf with piercing blue eyes, raised his hand to cast another spell. But before he could finish, one of the Emberborn fired an arrow straight toward him. It struck true, grazing his shoulder and throwing him off balance. The commander stumbled, and another Emberborn took advantage of the opening, rushing forward to take him down. The third and fourth commanders tried to regroup, casting protective shields around themselves. But Kale was not afraid. He knew that this was their moment. With a surge of power, he raised the tablet once more, and a wave of light erupted from it, shattering the elves' defenses. The battle was fierce, but it was over faster than Kale had imagined. One by one, the commanders fell. The elves who had once ruled with cruelty and pride were now defeated, their magic no match for the will of the Emberborn. As the last commander fell to the ground, Kale stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily. His hand still gripped the tablet, the glow fading as the magic drained from it. He had done it. The Emberborn had done it. The keep was silent now, the only sound the heavy breathing of the rebel fighters. The elves had lost, and for the first time in centuries, the humans had won. Kel looked around at his people. They were battered, tired, but victorious. They had taken back their future, and the elves could never take it away again. We did it, Kel said, his voice filled with pride. We've won. The Emberborn cheered, their voices echoing through the halls. The fight was over, and the world would never be the same.